And in that case, looking at burnout, what would actually be the symptoms that would be considered as a burnout?
So there are individual differences. I think one of the main symptoms that we always see with burnout, and that's also kind of at the center of our definition when we look at clients, for example, is exhaustion.
Mhm.
So burnout means I'm absolutely exhausted. I can't keep up my energy anymore. I can't deal with my work or private demands anymore. Quite often, there's also accompanying physical symptoms. So, for example, I struggle to sleep, insomnia. Why? Because my thoughts might be racing, for example. Quite often, there's symptoms with my appetite. This is also classic stress symptoms. So, either I might binge eat because I'm so stressed, or my appetite might just disappear. I might have huge cravings for unhealthy food and not eat anything healthy anymore. I think most people would know that. So, all of these are stress symptoms that we can also observe in burnout already. One other one that I see quite often with clients who are already quite under a lot of chronic stress is nervous twitches. So, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but for me, I have actually, that the eyelid starts twitching and you can't control it and you're wondering if you've just been staring at a screen for too long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Or we get muscle tensions. I don't know, the neck muscles tense up, the jaw muscles tense up.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these are physical symptoms. And with regards to psychological symptoms, something else that we often see with burnout is slight depressive tendencies. So there is quite an overlap between depression and burnout. Just that with burnout, the exhaustion is more in the focus still. But still, people who suffer from a severe burnout may also experience severe depressive symptoms where they don't see a way out of work anymore, where the days feel kind of gray, where they have low moods. So, a lot of those symptoms we also find after a burnout.
So we have kind of these three groups categories that we have. First of all, the exhaustion, which I suppose is both physical and mental. Then we have the group of the physical symptoms, and at the end the psychological ones.
Yeah,
If a
or more emotional ones. Mhm.
emotional, yes. And if a person is getting diagnosed, which boxes would they have to take in each of these categories for a psychologist to be able to say you have burnout?
Unfortunately, because there's not the one clear classification, the tick box system is actually a bit difficult for burnout. So what I normally do when I try to diagnose clients, when I try to see where they're coming from, is to also look at the progression of where it comes from. So of course, I would see, is the exhaustion symptom there? So do people report that they feel a lack of energy? Do they report that they feel absolutely depleted? I can't work up the energy to cope with my day-to-day tasks anymore. I just want to stay in bed. That's one thing I would look at. The second thing I would look at is how did it start? So quite often we see a progression in burnout that, interestingly enough, and I think that's something you had in your last interview already, where the colleague said something about sometimes, more and more of the work because you love it so much can actually be a warning sign.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it really interesting because it links so strongly to burnout, because we often observe that the first stage of burnout is actually increased satisfaction. So people start off being really happy at work and they really want to excel at work. So they have this idealistic excitement about work. And because of that, they start pouring more and more of themselves into work. And as I said, work does not necessarily have to be paid work. But because of that pouring more and more of themselves into it, they have a lack of recovery. So they just can't really fully recharge their batteries anymore. And quite often, this is when chronic symptoms start. And it's really interesting because in a diagnostic process, we hear those steps very clearly and very often. And chronic symptoms are the ones that I already mentioned. So we start seeing physical symptoms at this stage. People start reporting that they don't sleep so well. They might also start saying, oh, yeah, for example, with psychologists, what we quite often hear is that rather than calling the clients by their names or talking about them as human beings, they might start saying, oh yeah, the depression in room 3. So rather than talking about people, they talk about diagnosis because they try to distance themselves from work.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often people at this stage also start reporting that they can't keep up anymore. They're not effective enough anymore. And in order to overcome this not being effective enough, they quite often try to put even more work in. which of course leads to a bit of a vicious cycle, because now they're pouring even more energy in and getting less out of it because, well, the body and the mind just can't keep up anymore. And this quite often leads to a crisis. So crisis means people realize now, okay, I'm putting so much effort in and still I can't keep up with my work. And unfortunately, quite often, this is the step where people come to see me, come to speak to me. Why am I saying unfortunately? Because one step earlier, so when they first notice the first symptoms, intervention would be a lot quicker. However, that's quite often the stage that people miss. They come when there's the full crisis. And it's not a problem. Better then than even later. And of course, we can still intervene. Just even a step earlier would be even quicker. And so this is the crisis that I normally see, which if there was no intervention there, then quite often the overwhelm could lead to a breakdown. And breakdown might then actually be a complete depression, might lead into aggressive behaviors. And those would be all the tendencies that I would try to spot in a diagnostic process, so that I would look out for. Are there concrete symptoms? What's the progression? The symptoms in those 3 classes that we already discussed. How do people talk about their work? And that way I can normally quite nicely pinpoint, not only is there a tendency towards a burnout, but also which stage might people be at.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to ICONIQ for more content around psychology and personal development. See you in the next video.